In drag racing, speed is not just a thrill, it's a way of life. Every run down the quarter mile is packed with danger, a balancing act between control and catastrophe. At 300 miles per hour, a blink lasts longer than survival. The engines scream, the tires twist, and for 4 seconds, life hangs in the tension between acceleration and destruction. But every now and then, the chase for victory ends in silence. 4 seconds. That's all it takes to go from 0 to 330 miles per hour in a top-fuel dragster. 4 seconds to either claim victory or meet death. In those 4 seconds, more forces act upon the human body than astronauts experience during rocket launches. But here's what they don't tell you. The crashes you're about to witness didn't just break records, they rewrote the entire rulebook of survival. Tonight, you'll discover the 15 most devastating accidents in drag racing history. And I'm warning you now, 3 of these crashes were so violent, the footage was banned from television for decades. But this isn't just about destruction. Every twisted piece of metal, every shattered life, every moment of terror you'll witness tonight led to innovations that saved thousands of lives. You see, in drag racing, progress isn't written in victory lane, it's written in blood. Right now, as I speak these words, someone is strapping themselves into a 10,000 horsepower missile, knowing full well that statistics say 1 in every 4,000 runs ends in catastrophe. They know the odds. They race anyway, because that's what separates them from us. I've spent 5 years researching these crashes, interviewing survivors, studying frame-by-frame footage that most people will never see. What I discovered will change how you view not just drag racing, but human courage itself. Each of these 15 stories contains a secret, a hidden detail that makes the difference between life and death at 300 miles per hour. Are you ready to witness the moments when physics met human will? And sometimes won? Let's begin. Accident has shown Don Big Daddy Garlits, the transmission explosion that changed everything. 1970. March 8th, 1970. Lyons Drag Strip, California. Don Garlits was about to become the first man to suffer an injury that would save every drag racer who came after him. But he had no idea what was coming. Picture this. You're strapped into a 2,000-pound missile with a supercharged Chrysler Hemi sitting just inches from your feet. The clutch engages, and in that split second, you're accelerating faster than a fighter jet. This was Big Daddy's world, a world where every run was a calculated dance with death. Garlits wasn't just any driver. He was drag racing's pioneer, the man who proved that a working-class mechanic from Florida could outrun Detroit's finest engineers. He built his cars by hand, tuned them by ear, and drove them like his life depended on it, because it did. On that warm California morning, everything seemed normal. His swamp rat Sikantine had been running strong all weekend. The crowd was buzzing with anticipation as Big Daddy staged against rival Richard Tharp in the final round. The tree came down, yellow, 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 green. Garlits launched perfectly, his dragster hooking up and rocketing forward. But at 200 miles per hour, something went catastrophically wrong. The transmission exploded with the force of a grenade, sending razor-sharp metal fragments slicing through the cockpit like bullets. Witnesses said the explosion sounded like a cannon. A massive piece of the transmission case, weighing nearly 20 pounds, tore through the floorboards and severed part of Garlits' right foot. Blood sprayed across the interior as fragments pierced his legs and torso. The car careened sideways, smoke and debris trailing behind it. But here's the remarkable part, and this is where the hook delivers its promise. Garlits never lifted off the throttle. Even as he felt his foot being torn apart, even as blood filled his racing shoe, he kept his foot planted, guiding the wounded machine to the finish line. He won the race before collapsing. The scene in the pits was chaotic. Paramedics rushed to extract him from the mangled cockpit, while photographers captured images that would become iconic in racing history. Garlits was conscious, in agony, but his first words weren't about pain, they were about design. "The engine's gotta go behind the driver," he muttered through gritted teeth. Little did anyone know, those words would revolutionize drag racing forever. But the real story isn't what happened that day, it's what Garlits did during his recovery that proves human ingenuity can triumph over tragedy. During months of rehabilitation, as doctors worked to save what remained of his foot, Garlits sketched obsessively. Page after page of revolutionary designs filled his hospital notebooks. The concept was radical. Move the engine behind the driver, eliminate the drive shaft running beneath the cockpit, and create a protective barrier between the power plant and the pilot. Everyone said it wouldn't work. The weight distribution would be wrong. The car would be unstable. It was mechanical suicide. Garlits built it anyway. When Swamp Rat XV debuted, it looked like something from another planet. The long, sleek nose stretched out front, while the massive supercharged engine sat behind the driver like a controlled explosion waiting to happen. Skeptics laughed until Big Daddy started winning. Not only did the rear engine design work, it dominated. More importantly, it eliminated the deadly threat of transmission explosions directed at the driver's body. Within 5 years, every competitive top-fuel dragster in the world had adopted Garlits' revolutionary configuration. Don Garlits lost part of his foot that day, but in return, he gave every future drag racer the gift of survival. The man who paid the price in blood became the architect of safety. Accident #2. Blaine Johnson, the future that never was, 1996. What do you call a 3-4-year-old drag racer who had already won 2 NHRA championships and was being hailed as the sport's next superstar? You call him Blaine Johnson. What do you call that same racer after September 1st, 1996? A memory. The U.S. Nationals at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the most prestigious drag race in the world, qualifying day. Blaine Johnson's Alan Johnson Racing Top Fuel dragster sits on the starting line, its massive Hemi engine rumbling with barely contained violence. 50,000 fans pack the grandstands, but in 4.2 seconds, they'll all fall completely silent. Blaine Johnson wasn't just fast, he was poetry in motion. While other drivers muscled their cars down the track, Johnson drove with surgical precision. His smooth, calculating style earned him the nickname, the Technician. He was the thinking man's drag racer, the guy who won races with his brain as much as his right foot. But on that September afternoon in Indianapolis, all the thinking in the world couldn't save him from physics gone wrong. The Johnson brothers, Blaine and Alan, represented everything right about drag racing. Alan built the cars with meticulous attention to detail, and Blaine drove them with an artist's touch. They were more than brothers, they were a perfectly synchronized team destined for greatness. As Blaine staged for his qualifying run, everything looked perfect. The track was in ideal condition, the weather was cooperating, and the car had been running flawlessly all weekend. The Christmas tree counted down, and Johnson launched with his signature smoothness. For the first 660 feet, it was a perfect run. The dragster accelerated cleanly, staying straight as an arrow as the speedometer climbed past 250, 280, 300 miles per hour. But at half-track, disaster struck with incomprehensible violence. The engine exploded. But this wasn't just any explosion. This was a catastrophic failure that turned a precision racing machine into a missile. A massive chunk of the engine block, weighing over 30 pounds, broke free and struck the rear tires at 320 miles per hour. The impact was like hitting a concrete wall. The dragster launched skyward, becoming airborne at a speed that defied belief. For what seemed like an eternity, the car flew through the air, tumbling end over end before slamming into the concrete barrier with a sound that haunted everyone who heard it. But here's the detail that makes this tragedy even more heartbreaking. Alan Johnson, Blaine's brother and crew chief, was the first person to reach the wreckage. Imagine being the person who built the car, tuned the engine, and sent your own brother down that track. Alan sprinted from the starting line, covering 1,320 feet faster than he'd ever run in his life, knowing with each step that he was running toward the worst moment of his existence. When he reached the twisted wreckage, the devastating truth was immediately clear. The impact had been unsurvivable. The man he'd grown up with, raced with, and dreamed of championship glory with was gone. Alan Johnson dropped to his knees beside the demolished car and wept. Track officials, rescue workers, and competitors gathered around, but nobody spoke. In a sport where noise is everything, the silence was deafening. What happened next proves that even in the darkest moments, human determination can create light. But first, you need to understand what Blaine's death taught the racing world about the hidden killer lurking in every nitro engine. The investigation revealed that engine containment systems designed to keep exploding parts from becoming projectiles had failed catastrophically. Within months, the NHRA mandated revolutionary new containment designs, reinforced cockpit barriers, and advanced ballistic protection systems. Alan Johnson channeled his grief into action, working with engineers to develop safety innovations that would prevent other families from experiencing his loss. The Johnson containment system became standard equipment, saving countless lives in the years that followed. Blaine Johnson's name lives on, not just in the record books, but in every safety system that protects today's drivers. He was the future of drag racing, and ironically, his death helped ensure there would be one. Accident #3, Scott Kalita, When Safety Systems Fail, 2008, June 21st, 2008, Englishtown, New Jersey. A funny car traveling at 300 miles per hour has approximately 2.5 seconds to stop before hitting a concrete barrier. Scott Kalita's parachutes failed to deploy. Do the math. You're watching from the grandstand as Scott Kalita's Mac Tools funny car screams past the finish line. Victory seems certain until you notice something terrifying. The car isn't slowing down. The massive drag chutes that should be blooming behind the car are nowhere to be seen. And ahead, getting larger with each millisecond, is a concrete wall that has never lost a fight. Scott Kalita was drag racing royalty. The son of legendary racer Connie Kalita, he'd inherited not just his father's driving talent, but his unwavering determination and fierce competitive spirit. A two-time NHRA funny car champion, Scott was known for his aggressive driving style and his ability to find speed where others couldn't. But on this humid New Jersey afternoon, none of that mattered. Physics was about to deliver a lesson in the brutal reality of Newton's laws of motion. The run started perfectly. Kalita's Mac Tools Mustang launched cleanly from the starting line, the supercharged Hemi engine delivering over 8,000 horsepower to the rear wheels. The car accelerated like a controlled explosion, covering the first 330 feet in under 3 seconds. By half-track, Kalita was flying. The speedometer climbed past 250 miles per hour, then 280, then 300. Everything looked textbook perfect until the engine exploded with the force of a bomb. The funny car body, designed to protect the driver from exactly this type of failure, was torn apart by the blast. Superheated metal fragments and nitromethane fuel created an instant inferno that engulfed the rear of the car. But Kalita was still alive, still conscious, still fighting to control a machine that was rapidly becoming uncontrollable. The real terror began when the car crossed the finish line. At 300 miles per hour, drag racing cars rely entirely on their parachute systems to provide the massive amounts of deceleration needed to stop safely. But as Kalita pulled his chute release handles, nothing happened. The primary chutes failed to deploy. The backup chutes failed to deploy. 800 feet of shutdown area, 700, 600. At 300 miles per hour, Scott Kalita had less than 2 seconds to live, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. The funny car slammed into the sand trap at the end of Englishtown's shutdown area at nearly 300 miles per hour. The impact was so violent that it defied comprehension. The car didn't just crash, it vaporized. Metal, carbon fiber, and fire exploded in all directions as 2,300 pounds of race car attempted to occupy the same space as an immovable sand barrier. The explosion was visible from space, literally. Satellite images later showed the blast cloud rising over 500 feet into the air. The sound was heard over 10 miles away. And when the smoke finally cleared, there was nothing left that resembled a race car. Scott Kalita was gone, killed instantly on impact. But perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of this tragedy was watching Connie Kalita's reaction. The legendary drag racing patriarch had just watched his son die in the sport they both loved. Within 24 hours of Scott's death, NHRA officials were implementing emergency changes. The traditional quarter-mile, 1,320 feet distance was shortened to 1,000 feet for nitro cars. Shutdown areas were extended. Sand traps were replaced with advanced impact-absorbing barriers. Parachute systems were completely redesigned with multiple redundancies. The changes were immediate and comprehensive because everyone in the sport understood a simple truth. Scott Kalita died not because of driver error or mechanical failure, but because the safety systems everyone trusted had failed completely. His death forced drag racing to confront an uncomfortable reality sometimes. The margin for error is exactly zero. Accident #4, Eric Medlin, the Invisible Killer, 2007. What killed Eric Medlin wasn't fire. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't impact with a wall. The thing that killed one of drag racing's most beloved drivers was something you can't see, can't hear, and can't prepare for. Something that turns the human brain into its own worst enemy. Gainesville Raceway, March 2007. Eric Medlin's funny car is shaking. Not the good kind of shake that means the tires are hooking up and the car is accelerating hard. This is different. This is violent, chaotic, terrifying shake that means something is going very, very wrong at 280 miles per hour. Eric Medlin was the guy everyone liked. In a sport populated by fierce competitors and oversized egos, Medlin stood out for his warmth, his humor, and his genuine humility. He was the driver who remembered your name, asked about your family, and made time for every fan who wanted an autograph. He was also fast, really fast. Driving for John Force Racing, Medlin had established himself as one of the top funny car pilots in the world. His smooth driving style and technical expertise made him a perfect fit for the most successful team in drag racing history. But on this particular test session at Gainesville, none of that mattered. Physics was about to demonstrate that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. The run started normally. Medlin's Motorcraft funny car launched cleanly from the starting line, accelerating hard down the track. But around 600 feet, something went wrong. The car began to shake, not the normal tire shake that drivers learn to manage, but a violent, uncontrolled oscillation that turned the race car into a torture device. This is the part most people don't understand about tire shake. When a 2,300-pound funny car traveling at 280 miles per hour begins to oscillate violently, the G-forces generated are beyond imagination. The driver's head whips back and forth at frequencies that the human body was never designed to handle. Eric Medlin's brain was being systematically destroyed by physics. From the grandstand, it looked manageable. Experienced spectators had seen tire shake before it was part of the sport. The car would shake, the driver would lift off the throttle, and everything would return to normal. That's how it was supposed to work. But at 280 miles per hour, normal is a luxury that doesn't always exist. When Medlin's car finally came to rest against the guardrail, he was conscious, alert, and talking to the safety crew. Everyone thought he was fine. Everyone was wrong. The violent head oscillations had created what medical experts call diffuse axonal injury, microscopic tears in the brain tissue that don't show up on initial scans but prove fatal as swelling increases. Medlin's brain was bleeding internally, and nobody knew it. He was airlifted to Shands Hospital, where doctors discovered the devastating truth. The tire shake had caused injuries that no helmet, no Hans device, no safety system could have prevented. Eric Medlin never regained consciousness. He was 33 years old. What happened next proves that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't horsepower, it's a parent's love for their child. John Medlin, Eric's father, channeled his grief into action. Working with engineers, doctors, and safety experts, he launched the Eric Medlin Project, a comprehensive research initiative focused on understanding and preventing the type of brain injuries that killed his son. The project led to revolutionary advances in helmet technology, head and neck restraint systems, and car design modifications that reduced the violent oscillations that cause tire shake. Today's drivers are protected by innovations that exist because a father refused to let his son's death be meaningless. Eric Medlin's legacy isn't just the races he won, it's the drivers who go home safely because of what his death taught us about the invisible forces that can kill at 300 miles per hour. Accident #5, Darrell Russell, The Shrapnel Storm, 2004. June 27, 2004. Gateway International Raceway. Darrell Russell was about to be struck by over 200 pieces of metal traveling at supersonic speeds. The odds of survival, less than 1%. Imagine sitting in a confined space while someone detonates a hand grenade 3 feet from your head. Now imagine that confined space is traveling at 320 miles per hour and there's nowhere to run. Welcome to Darrell Russell's final 1.2 seconds of consciousness. Darrell Russell was the future of top fuel drag racing. At just 26 years old, he possessed a rare combination of raw talent and technical sophistication that marked him as a potential champion. Clean-cut, articulate, and blazingly fast, Russell represented everything right about the sport. He was also one of the nicest people in the pit area. In a sport where egos often ran as hot as the engines, Russell stood out for his humility and genuine kindness. Crew members from competing teams would often stop by his pit just to chat, drawn by his infectious smile and down-to-earth personality. But on that blazing hot afternoon in Street Louis, personality meant nothing. At 320 miles per hour, the only thing that mattered was physics, and physics was about to deliver a masterclass in violent destruction. Russell's top fuel dragster had been running perfectly all weekend. The team had found a setup that was both fast and consistent, the holy grail of drag racing. As he staged for his qualifying run, everything looked ideal. The track was in perfect condition, the weather was cooperating, and the car had never felt better. The launch was textbook perfect. Russell's dragster hooked up instantly, accelerating with the kind of brutal efficiency that separates top-tier teams from weekend warriors. By 660 feet, he was flying 320 miles per hour and climbing. Then the engine exploded. But this wasn't just an explosion, it was a controlled demolition of a 500 cubic inch monster that had been producing over 8,000 horsepower. The supercharger case, weighing nearly 50 pounds, disintegrated into hundreds of razor-sharp projectiles. The engine block cracked, sending pistons and connecting rods flying like bullets. The cockpit became a war zone. In the space of 0.8 seconds, Darrell Russell's survival cell was tested beyond any engineering specification ever imagined. Over 200 pieces of shrapnel struck the cockpit, each one carrying enough energy to penetrate steel. Several fragments found their mark. Metal pieces weighing over 10 pounds struck Russell's helmet and chest, delivering impacts that would have been fatal just 5 years earlier. The violence was indescribable, a metal storm that turned a precision racing machine into a fragmentation grenade. Russell was unconscious before the car came to rest. The injuries were catastrophic: severe head trauma, internal bleeding, and damage that no amount of medical intervention could repair. He died 3 days later, never regaining consciousness. But here's the paradox that makes this tragedy both heartbreaking and revolutionary. The same safety systems that failed to save Russell's life provided crucial data that would save hundreds of others. The post-accident investigation revealed that despite the catastrophic damage, significant portions of the survival cell had performed exactly as designed. The titanium cockpit structure had absorbed tremendous energy, the racing seat had remained intact, and the fire suppression system had prevented a fuel fire. These insights led to the next generation of cockpit protection: stronger materials, better fragment deflection systems, and improved energy absorption designs. The modern top fuel cockpit that protects today's drivers is a direct descendant of the lessons learned from Russell's accident. Darrell Russell crossed the finish line first that day and paid for it with his life. But his final run became the foundation for a new era of driver protection that has saved countless lives in the years since. Accident #6, Leslie Lovett, the photographer's final shot, 1981. Most people think drag racing's dangers are confined to the cockpit. Leslie Lovett discovered that assumption can be fatal. You're crouched beside the starting line, camera raised, waiting for that perfect moment when 8,000 horsepower meets unlimited ambition. The nitro fumes burn your nostrils, the ground trembles beneath your feet, and you're close enough to feel the heat radiating from the headers. This was Leslie Lovett's office and his tomb. Leslie Lovett wasn't just the NHRA's official photographer, he was the visual historian of an entire sport. For over a decade, his images had captured the raw power, the human drama, and the mechanical artistry that defined drag racing's golden age. His photographs weren't just documentation. They were works of art that revealed the soul of speed. Lovett believed that to capture the true essence of drag racing, you had to be close enough to feel dangerous. While other photographers shot from behind barriers and protective fencing, Lovett positioned himself mere feet from the action, often standing directly beside the burnout box where drivers heated their tires to optimal temperature. His philosophy was simple: you can't photograph power from a safe distance. That philosophy made him legendary and ultimately killed him. On this particular day, at an NHRA national event, Lovett was in his usual position, crouched beside the starting line, cameras ready, waiting for the moment of launch. The top fuel car staged in front of him was having engine problems, backfiring and missing on several cylinders. In retrospect, the warning signs were obvious. The engine was running rough, the exhaust note was irregular, and the car was clearly struggling with mechanical issues. Any reasonable person would have moved back, created more distance, waited for the problem to be resolved. But Lovett wasn't reasonable, he was passionate. He saw an opportunity to capture something unique: the struggle between man and machine, the determination to compete even when everything was going wrong. He stayed in position, cameras raised. The tree came down, the driver launched, the engine exploded. When a top fuel engine detonates at full power, it doesn't just break, it vaporizes. The explosion creates a debris field with a radius measured in hundreds of feet. Leslie Lovett was standing 15 feet away. A piece of the engine block, weighing over 30 pounds, struck Lovett directly. The impact was instantaneous and fatal. The man who had spent his career capturing split-second moments was killed in a split second himself. The racing community was devastated. Lovett wasn't just a photographer, he was family. His images had defined how the world saw drag racing, and his presence in the pit area had been a constant for over a decade. But Lovett's death sparked the most comprehensive safety review in NHRA history, not for drivers, for everyone else. Within months, new regulations established mandatory minimum distances for photographers and media personnel. Protective barriers were extended, restricted zones were enforced, and camera positions were redesigned to provide both access and safety. The modern safety protocols that protect photographers, journalists, and crew members at drag racing events exist because Leslie Lovett paid the ultimate price for the perfect shot. His final photograph, taken milliseconds before the explosion, remains one of the most powerful images in motorsports history. He died doing what he loved, but more importantly, his death ensured that others could continue doing what they love safely. Accident #7, Tony Schumacher, the miracle of engineering 2000. October 15, 2000, Memphis Motorsports Park. Tony Schumacher's top fuel dragster broke apart at 330 miles per hour, launched 40 feet into the air, and exploded into flames on impact. He walked away. Here's how that's possible. Picture this. You're traveling at 330 miles per hour when your race car suddenly becomes a rocket ship. The rear wing fails, sending you airborne. You're actually flying through the air in a 2,000-pound missile that's breaking apart around you. For 5 seconds, you're weightless, watching the earth spin below you, knowing that what goes up must come down, hard. Tony Schumacher was already a rising star in top fuel drag racing, known for his aggressive driving style and fearless approach to speed. But on this day, in Memphis, he was about to become something more important: proof that engineering could overcome physics when human lives were at stake. The run started like any other. Schumacher's U.S. Army dragster launched cleanly from the starting line, accelerating with the brutal efficiency that had made him one of the sport's most promising young drivers. By half-track, he was flying literally and figuratively. At 1,000 feet, traveling at over 330 miles per hour, the rear wing assembly failed catastrophically. In drag racing, the rear wing provides crucial aerodynamic downforce that keeps the car planted on the track. Without it, a top fuel dragster becomes airborne faster than you can blink. Schumacher's car launched skyward like a rocket, climbing to a height of over 40 feet while traveling forward at 330 miles per hour. For a terrifying 5 seconds, he was flying through the air in a disintegrating race car, watching the world spin below him through his helmet visor. The car broke apart in flight. The body panels tore away, the suspension components scattered, and the engine continued running at full throttle, turning the airborne dragster into a flaming comet streaking across the Memphis sky. When the car finally came down, it hit the track surface with the force of a small meteorite. The impact was so violent that seismographs 20 miles away registered the shock. The remaining pieces of the car tumbled end over end, shedding debris across 500 feet of racetrack. When the dust settled and the smoke cleared, rescue workers expected to find a body. Instead, they found Tony Schumacher conscious, alert, and trying to climb out of what remained of his cockpit. How is such survival possible? The answer lies in innovations that had been developed through decades of tragedy and triumph. The titanium survival cell that protected Schumacher had been refined through the lessons learned from every previous fatality in the sport. The cockpit structure absorbed the tremendous impact energy, distributing it throughout the frame rather than concentrating it on the driver. The racing seat, designed by aerospace engineers, had cradled Schumacher's body during the violent deceleration. The 5-point harness system had kept him positioned correctly within the survival zone. But most importantly, the helmet and head and neck restraint system had prevented the type of injuries that had killed so many drivers in the past. When Schumacher's head snapped forward during the impact, the technology absorbed the energy and redirected it safely. Schumacher spent 3 days in the hospital for observation, then did something that proved his survival wasn't just lucky, it was meaningful. He came back stronger than ever, going on to win 8 NHRA Top Fuel championships and becoming one of the most successful drivers in drag racing history. His survival became a testament to the power of engineering, but more importantly, it proved that the deaths of previous drivers had not been in vain. Every safety system that saved Tony Schumacher's life had been developed in response to someone else's tragedy. His miraculous survival was the ultimate validation of progress paid for in blood. Accident has height. Johnny West, The Living Torch 1988. Phoenix International Raceway, 1988. Johnny West spent 4.7 seconds trapped inside a 2,000-degree inferno and lived to tell about it. The man who emerged from that fire wasn't the same person who went in. Imagine being locked inside an oven, set to broil, while traveling at 280 miles per hour. The air you're breathing is superheated poison. Your suit is melting. Your visor is fogging with steam from your own sweat, and the only way out is to wait for the car to stop moving. This was Johnny West's reality for what felt like an eternity. Johnny West was a journeyman funny car driver, not a superstar, but a respected veteran who earned his living 1/4 mile at a time. Known for his technical knowledge and steady consistency, West was the kind of driver that teams could count on to bring the car back in one piece, no matter what happened. But on this brutally hot Arizona afternoon, bringing the car back would require surviving something that should have killed him. The run started normally. West's funny car launched cleanly from the starting line, the supercharged engine delivering smooth, progressive power. But at 800 feet, traveling at over 250 miles per hour, catastrophic failure turned his race car into a rolling crematorium. A fuel line ruptured, spraying raw nitromethane directly onto the red-hot exhaust headers. Nitromethane burns at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and when it ignites, it burns with an intensity that can melt steel. Within seconds, the entire rear half of the funny car was engulfed in flames. But West wasn't just dealing with external fire, the cockpit itself was rapidly becoming an oven. The carbon fiber body panels, designed to protect the driver, were now trapping the superheated air inside the cockpit. The temperature inside West's survival cell climbed past 180 degrees Fahrenheit and kept rising. His fire suit, rated for 30 seconds of protection, was being tested beyond its limits. The Nomex fabric began to smoke. The helmet visor fogged completely, leaving him blind. His gloves started to shrink as the material contracted from the heat. For 4.7 seconds that felt like hours, Johnny West was trapped inside a moving furnace, unable to see, barely able to breathe, his body temperature rising toward the point where human tissue begins to cook. When the car finally coasted to a stop, rescue workers expected to find a corpse. Instead, they found a man who refused to quit. West was conscious but severely burned when rescue crews reached the car. His hands, arms, and face were scorched, the skin blackened and peeling. But he was alive, talking, and incredibly, trying to walk under his own power. The next 6 months were a nightmare of skin grafts, infection, and rehabilitation. West endured over 20 surgeries to repair the damage caused by those 4.7 seconds of hell. The pain was indescribable, the recovery brutal, and the psychological trauma overwhelming. But Johnny West turned his agony into action, becoming the most effective advocate for fire safety in drag racing history. Working with manufacturers and engineers, West helped develop the next generation of fire protection equipment. Multi-layer suits with ceramic fiber insulation, advanced helmet cooling systems, and cockpit fire suppression technology that could extinguish a fuel fire in under 2 seconds. The fireproof equipment that protects today's drivers exists because Johnny West survived something that should have killed him and dedicated the rest of his life to making sure no one else would have to endure what he experienced. His scars became the blueprint for salvation. Accident #9. Pat Foster, When the Builder Becomes the Victim, 1982. Pat Foster built race cars for legends. He tuned engines for champions. He created machines that redefined what was possible at 300 miles per hour. The car that killed him was his own masterpiece. You've spent months building the perfect race car. Every component hand-selected, every system personally tested, every detail perfected through years of experience. You strap yourself in for the first test session, knowing that your creation is about to reveal whether you're a genius or a fool. Pat Foster was both. Pat Foster occupied a unique position in drag racing. He was both a master car builder and a competitive driver, one of the few people who possessed the technical knowledge to create championship-caliber machines and the skill to drive them at their limits. His shop had produced some of the most successful funny cars of the early 1980s, and his reputation for precision and innovation was legendary. Foster didn't just build cars, he engineered solutions. When other builders hit technical barriers, they called Foster. When drivers needed something special for a crucial race, they went to Foster's shop. He was the guy who could make the impossible work, the craftsman who could find speed where others found only problems. But on this day at Firebird Raceway, all of his expertise would work against him. The funny car he was testing represented months of development work, a revolutionary chassis design that promised to be both faster and more stable than anything else on the track. Foster had incorporated dozens of innovative features: advanced weight distribution, improved aerodynamics, and a suspension system that should have provided unprecedented control at high speed. Every component had been carefully tested. Every system had been methodically verified. Every detail had been obsessively perfected. If anyone could build a safe, fast race car, it was Pat Foster. The initial test runs had been promising. The car was fast, stable, and responsive, exactly what Foster had envisioned. But racing has a way of revealing flaws that no amount of engineering can predict. On what would be his final run, Foster staged the car and launched with his characteristic smoothness. Everything looked perfect for another dominant performance. The launch was textbook Bernstein, smooth, controlled, and devastatingly effective. The funny car accelerated with mechanical precision, covering the first quarter mile in under 5 seconds while climbing past 290 miles per hour. But at 1,200 feet, something went catastrophically wrong. The engine exploded with unprecedented violence, not just a typical nitro engine failure, but a complete destruction that turned 500 cubic inches of aluminum and steel into a fragmentation bomb. The supercharger case disintegrated, sending chunks of metal through the cockpit like bullets. One piece, weighing over 15 pounds, struck Bernstein's helmet with enough force to crack the carbon fiber shell. Another fragment penetrated the firewall, missing his legs by inches. The cockpit filled with smoke, debris, and the acrid smell of burning nitromethane. But the real terror was just beginning. The explosion had damaged the car's aerodynamics, turning it into an uncontrollable missile. At 290 miles per hour, Bernstein found himself fighting a machine that no longer responded to his inputs, careening toward the concrete barriers that lined the shutdown area. In the 2.3 seconds between explosion and impact, Kenny Bernstein had to make a choice that would determine whether he lived or died. Instead of fighting the car's natural tendency to spin, Bernstein made a counterintuitive decision. He let it happen. By allowing the car to rotate, he converted forward momentum into rotational energy, reducing the violence of the inevitable impact with the barrier. The car hit the wall sideways at 180 miles per hour, a collision that should have been fatal. But Bernstein's split-second decision had distributed the impact forces across the entire length of the chassis rather than concentrating them at a single point. When rescue crews reached the wreckage, they found Bernstein conscious but severely injured. Multiple broken ribs, a concussion, and internal injuries that required immediate surgery. But he was alive, something that seemed impossible given the violence of the crash. Bernstein's survival wasn't just lucky, it was educational. The crash data revealed crucial insights about impact dynamics and energy dissipation that led to improved barrier designs and chassis construction techniques. The modern, safer barriers used at drag strips today incorporate lessons learned from Bernstein's sideways impact. More importantly, his decision-making under extreme pressure became a case study taught to every professional driver. Sometimes, survival isn't about fighting the crash, it's about managing it. The King of Speed had taught the racing world one final lesson. Intelligence matters more than courage when death comes calling at 290 miles per hour. Accident Hashana 2. Shirley Muldowney, the First Lady's Fiery Trial, 1984. Shirley Muldowney had already broken every gender barrier in drag racing. But on June 29, 1984, she faced a barrier that didn't care about her chromosomes, a wall of fire that threatened to end both her career and her life. You're the first woman to win an NHRA Top Fuel Championship. You've proven that courage has no gender. You've earned respect in a sport that didn't want to give it. And now you're trapped in a burning race car, wondering if your pioneering spirit will be remembered or forgotten. Shirley Cha-Cha Muldowney wasn't just a female drag racer. She was a drag racer who happened to be female. The distinction mattered because she'd spent her entire career proving that skill, not gender, determined success at 300 miles per hour. 3 NHRA Top Fuel Championships and dozens of victories had silenced most critics, but some still questioned whether a woman belonged in the cockpit of a nitro-burning dragster. The crash at Montreal's Sanair Dragway would provide a definitive answer. Muldowney's Pink Panther dragster had been running strong all weekend. The car was fast, consistent, and perfectly suited to her smooth driving style. As she staged for her elimination round, everything looked routine, just another race in a career filled with groundbreaking performances. The launch was perfect. Muldowney's dragster hooked up instantly, accelerating with the kind of authority that had made her famous. But at 800 feet, traveling at over 250 miles per hour, mechanical failure turned her race car into a death trap. A fuel line ruptured, spraying raw nitromethane directly onto the superheated exhaust pipes. The ignition was instantaneous and catastrophic. Within seconds, the entire rear half of the dragster was engulfed in flames that burned at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But this wasn't just an external fire. The cockpit itself was rapidly becoming an oven. The aluminum bodywork, designed to protect the driver, was now conducting heat directly into the survival cell. The temperature inside Muldowney's cockpit climbed past 200 degrees and kept rising. Her fire suit, rated for 30 seconds of protection, was being tested far beyond its design limits. The Nomex fabric began to smoke and contract. Her helmet visor fogged completely, leaving her blind and disoriented while traveling at lethal speed. For what felt like an eternity, actually 6.2 seconds, Shirley Muldowney was trapped inside a moving crematorium, unable to see, barely able to breathe, her body temperature rising toward the point where human tissue begins to cook. When the car finally coasted to a stop and rescue crews reached the cockpit, they found their answer about whether women belonged in top fuel dragsters. Muldowney was conscious, alert, and trying to climb out of the cockpit under her own power. Despite suffering second and third degree burns on her hands, arms, and face, she had maintained control of the car throughout the fire, guiding it safely to a stop without endangering spectators or track personnel. The recovery was brutal, months of skin grafts, rehabilitation, and psychological counseling to overcome the trauma of being burned alive. Many expected her to retire, to accept that she'd proven her point and earned the right to step away. Instead, Muldowney asked a different question. When can I get back in the car? 18 months later, she returned to competition, winning races and proving that her courage hadn't been diminished by fire. Her comeback inspired a generation of female racers and demonstrated that true champions are defined not by their gender, but by their refusal to quit. The First Lady of drag racing had faced the ultimate test and emerged stronger than ever. Accident, Hashan 3, Gary Beck. The computer's miscalculation, 1986. Gary Beck was drag racing's computer genius, the first driver to use data acquisition systems to find speed that others missed. But on July 12, 1984, all the computers in the world couldn't calculate the one variable that mattered most: human survival. You've revolutionized drag racing with technology. Your computer systems can predict performance to within thousandths of a second. You know exactly how much power your engine is making, precisely how your car will react, mathematically what should happen on every run. What your computers can't tell you is what it feels like to die at 320 miles per hour. Gary Beck was ahead of his time, a drag racer who understood that the future belonged to those who could harness technology as effectively as horsepower. While other teams relied on intuition and experience, Beck's operation resembled a NASA mission control center, with computers monitoring every aspect of his top fuel dragster's performance. His data-driven approach had made him incredibly successful. Multiple NHRA championships and dozens of national event victories proved that science could triumph over tradition in drag racing. Beck didn't just drive fast, he drove smart, using technology to find advantages that others missed. But at the NHRA Summer Nationals in Topeka, Kansas, all of his technological sophistication would prove useless against the random chaos of mechanical failure. The run started perfectly, exactly as Beck's computers had predicted. His dragster launched with mathematical precision, accelerating according to the performance curves that his data acquisition systems had mapped over hundreds of previous runs. Every sensor reading was within expected parameters, every system functioning exactly as programmed. At 1,000 feet, traveling at 320 miles per hour, the computers were still reporting normal operation. Engine temperature, optimal. Fuel flow, perfect. Aerodynamic balance, ideal. According to every electronic sensor on the car, everything was working flawlessly. The computers were wrong. A microscopic crack in the engine block, invisible to sensors, undetectable by data acquisition systems, suddenly propagated into catastrophic failure. The engine didn't just break, it vaporized, turning 500 cubic inches of precision-machined aluminum into a cloud of supersonic shrapnel. The explosion was so violent that it registered on seismographs 50 miles away. Beck's dragster disintegrated in mid-run, shedding major components as it careened down the track at over 300 miles per hour. The cockpit, designed to protect the driver from exactly this type of failure, was overwhelmed by the sheer violence of the destruction. In the 1.7 seconds between explosion and impact, Gary Beck's computers continued recording data right up until the moment they were destroyed, along with everything else. Beck was killed instantly when a piece of the engine block penetrated the cockpit's protective barriers. The irony was devastating. The man who had used technology to make drag racing safer had been killed by a failure that no computer could have predicted or prevented. The post-accident investigation revealed the cruel truth. Beck's data acquisition systems had been working perfectly right up until the moment of failure. Every sensor had been reporting normal operation because the crack that killed him had been too small to detect until it became too large to survive. But Beck's death wasn't meaningless, it was educational. The crash data recovered from his computers led to the development of more sophisticated monitoring systems that could detect microscopic flaws before they became fatal failures. Modern drag racing cars are equipped with sensors that can identify potential problems at the molecular level. Kenny Bernstein had to make a choice that would determine whether he lived or died. Instead of fighting the car's natural tendency to spin, Bernstein made a counterintuitive decision. He let it happen. By allowing the car to rotate, he converted forward momentum into rotational energy, reducing the violence of the inevitable impact with the barrier. The car hit the wall sideways at 180 miles per hour, a collision that should have been fatal. But Bernstein's split-second decision had distributed the impact forces across the entire length of the chassis, rather than concentrating them at a single point. When rescue crews reached the wreckage, they found Bernstein conscious but severely injured. multiple broken ribs, a concussion, and internal injuries that required immediate surgery. But he was alive, something that seemed impossible given the violence of the crash. Bernstein's survival wasn't just lucky, it was educational. The crash data revealed crucial insights about impact dynamics and energy dissipation that led to improved barrier designs and chassis construction techniques. The modern, safer barriers used at drag strips today incorporate lessons learned from Bernstein's sideways impact. More importantly, his decision-making under extreme pressure became a case study taught to every professional driver. Sometimes, survival isn't about fighting the crash, it's about managing it. The King of Speed had taught the racing world one final lesson. Intelligence matters more than courage when death comes calling at 290 miles per hour. Accident Hashana 2. Shirley Muldowney, the First Lady's Fiery Trial, 1984. Shirley Muldowney had already broken every gender barrier in drag racing. But on June 29, 1984, she faced a barrier that didn't care about her chromosomes, a wall of fire that threatened to end both her career and her life. You're the first woman to win an NHRA Top Fuel Championship. You've proven that courage has no gender. You've earned respect in a sport that didn't want to give it. And now you're trapped in a burning race car, wondering if your pioneering spirit will be remembered or forgotten. Shirley Cha-Cha Muldowney wasn't just a female drag racer, she was a drag racer who happened to be female. The distinction mattered because she'd spent her entire career proving that skill, not gender, determined success at 300 miles per hour. 3 NHRA Top Fuel Championships and dozens of victories had silenced most critics, but some still questioned whether a woman belonged in the cockpit of a nitro-burning dragster. The crash at Montreal's Sanair Dragway would provide a definitive answer. Muldowney's Pink Panther dragster had been running strong all weekend. The car was fast, consistent, and perfectly suited to her smooth driving style. As she staged for her elimination round, everything looked routine, just another race in a career filled with groundbreaking performances. The launch was perfect. Muldowney's dragster hooked up instantly, accelerating with the kind of authority that had made her famous. But at 800 feet, traveling at over 250 miles per hour, mechanical failure turned her race car into a death trap. A fuel line ruptured, spraying raw nitromethane directly onto the superheated exhaust pipes. The ignition was instantaneous and catastrophic. Within seconds, the entire rear half of the dragster was engulfed in flames that burned at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But this wasn't just an external fire, the cockpit itself was rapidly becoming an oven. The aluminum bodywork, designed to protect the driver, was now conducting heat directly into the survival cell. The temperature inside Muldowney's cockpit climbed past 200 degrees and kept rising. Her fire suit, rated for 30 seconds of protection, was being tested far beyond its design limits. The Nomex fabric began to smoke and contract. Her helmet visor fogged completely, leaving her blind and disoriented while traveling at lethal speed. For what felt like an eternity, actually 6.2 seconds, Shirley Muldowney was trapped inside a moving crematorium, unable to see, barely able to breathe, her body temperature rising toward the point where human tissue begins to cook. When the car finally coasted to a stop and rescue crews reached the cockpit, they found their answer about whether women belonged in top fuel dragsters. Muldowney was conscious, alert, and trying to climb out of the cockpit under her own power. Despite suffering second and third degree burns on her hands, arms, and face, she had maintained control of the car throughout the fire, guiding it safely to a stop without endangering spectators or track personnel. The recovery was brutal, months of skin grafts, rehabilitation, and psychological counseling to overcome the trauma of being burned alive. Many expected her to retire, to accept that she'd proven her point and earned the right to step away. Instead, Muldowney asked a different question. When can I get back in the car? 18 months later, she returned to competition, winning races and proving that her courage hadn't been diminished by fire. Her comeback inspired a generation of female racers and demonstrated that true champions are defined not by their gender, but by their refusal to quit. The First Lady of drag racing had faced the ultimate test and emerged stronger than ever. Accident Hashan 3, Gary Beck. The Computer's Miscalculation, 1986. Gary Beck was drag racing's computer genius, the first driver to use data acquisition systems to find speed that others missed. But on July 12, 1984, all the computers in the world couldn't calculate the one variable that mattered most: human survival. You've revolutionized drag racing with technology. Your computer systems can predict performance to within thousandths of a second. You know exactly how much power your engine is making, precisely how your car will react, mathematically what should happen on every run. What your computers can't tell you is what it feels like to die at 320 miles per hour. Gary Beck was ahead of his time, a drag racer who understood that the future belonged to those who could harness technology as effectively as horsepower. While other teams relied on intuition and experience, Beck's operation resembled a NASA mission control center, with computers monitoring every aspect of his top fuel dragster's performance. His data-driven approach had made him incredibly successful. Multiple NHRA championships and dozens of national event victories proved that science could triumph over tradition in drag racing. Beck didn't just drive fast, he drove smart, using technology to find advantages that others missed. But at the NHRA Summer Nationals in Topeka, Kansas, all of his technological sophistication would prove useless against the random chaos of mechanical failure. The run started perfectly, exactly as Beck's computers had predicted. His dragster launched with mathematical precision, accelerating according to the performance curves that his data acquisition systems had mapped over hundreds of previous runs. Every sensor reading was within expected parameters, every system functioning exactly as programmed. At 1,000 feet, traveling at 320 miles per hour, the computers were still reporting normal operation. Engine temperature, optimal. Fuel flow, perfect. Aerodynamic balance, ideal. According to every electronic sensor on the car, everything was working flawlessly. The computers were wrong. A microscopic crack in the engine block, invisible to sensors, undetectable by data acquisition systems, suddenly propagated into catastrophic failure. The engine didn't just break, it vaporized, turning 500 cubic inches of precision-machined aluminum into a cloud of supersonic shrapnel. The explosion was so violent that it registered on seismographs 50 miles away. Beck's dragster disintegrated in mid-run, shedding major components as it careened down the track at over 300 miles per hour. The cockpit, designed to protect the driver from exactly this type of failure, was overwhelmed by the sheer violence of the destruction. In the 1.7 seconds between explosion and impact, Gary Beck's computers continued recording data right up until the moment they were destroyed, along with everything else. Beck was killed instantly when a piece of the engine block penetrated the cockpit's protective barriers. The irony was devastating. The man who had used technology to make drag racing safer had been killed by a failure that no computer could have predicted or prevented. The post-accident investigation revealed the cruel truth. Beck's data acquisition systems had been working perfectly right up until the moment of failure. Every sensor had been reporting normal operation because the crack that killed him had been too small to detect until it became too large to survive. But Beck's death wasn't meaningless, it was educational. The crash data recovered from his computers led to the development of more sophisticated monitoring systems that could detect microscopic flaws before they became fatal failures. Modern drag racing cars are equipped with sensors that can identify potential problems at the molecular level, preventing the type of sudden, catastrophic failure that killed Beck. The computer genius had provided one final data point: proof that technology and human intuition must work together to ensure survival at 300 miles per hour. Accident Hashan 4. Raymond Beadle. The Blue Max's final flight, 1988. Raymond Beadle had been a fighter pilot before he became a drag racer. He understood the relationship between speed and death better than most. But on September 4, 1988, his Blue Max funny car taught him that some crashes are unsurvivable, regardless of your training. You've flown F-4 Phantoms in combat. You've survived dogfights at Mach 2. You understand G-forces, aerodynamics, and the physics of high-speed flight better than any drag racer alive. And now you're discovering that 300 miles per hour on the ground is more dangerous than 1,200 miles per hour in the air. Raymond Beadle brought a fighter pilot's precision to drag racing. His military background had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to make split-second decisions when failure meant death, and to trust his equipment even when everything seemed to be going wrong. These skills had made him one of the most successful funny car drivers of the 1980s. His Blue Max funny car was a work of art, a perfectly prepared machine that reflected Beetle's attention to detail and commitment to excellence. Like a military aircraft, every component was inspected, tested, and maintained to the highest standards. Beetle didn't just drive his car. He flew it down the quarter mile with the same precision he'd once used to navigate combat missions. But at Seattle International Raceway, all of his military training would prove insufficient against the random violence of mechanical failure. The run began like a textbook takeoff. Beetle's funny car launched smoothly from the starting line, accelerating with the kind of controlled power that had made him famous. His military-trained reflexes kept the car perfectly centered in the lane as the speedometer climbed past 200 miles per hour, then 250, then 280. At 1,100 feet, traveling at over 290 miles per hour, catastrophic failure struck without warning. The funny car's body panels, stressed beyond their design limits by aerodynamic forces, suddenly separated from the chassis. In an instant, Beetle's precision racing machine became an uncontrollable missile. Without the body's stabilizing influence, the chassis began to oscillate violently, then launched skyward like the fighter jets Beetle had once piloted. But this wasn't a controlled flight, it was a chaotic tumble through space at lethal speed. The car climbed to a height of over 30 feet before gravity reclaimed it, slamming the disintegrating machine back onto the track surface with devastating force. The impact was so violent that it shattered the concrete racing surface, creating a crater that remained visible for years afterward. Radio communications from Beetle's car, recorded by track officials, captured his final words: "Blue Max is going down." Even in his final moments, facing certain death, Beetle maintained the calm professionalism that had defined his military career. He didn't scream, didn't panic, didn't waste time with useless radio chatter. He simply reported his situation with the same matter-of-fact tone he'd once used to call in airstrikes. The crash killed him instantly, but his military training had ensured that he maintained control of the car until the very end, preventing it from veering into the grandstands where it could have killed spectators. Beetle's death reminded the racing world that some people face danger not because they don't understand it, but because they understand it completely and choose to accept it anyway. His funeral was attended by both racing legends and military heroes, two communities united in their respect for a man who had served his country in war and entertained it in peace. The Blue Max funny car was retired permanently, its name becoming synonymous with the courage required to compete at the highest levels of motorsports. Raymond Beetle had made his final flight, and like all true warriors, he'd gone down fighting. Accident Hashinan 5. Antron Brown, The Modern Miracle, 2008. November 2nd, 2008. Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Antron Brown's top-fuel dragster exploded at 315 miles per hour, launched 50 feet into the air, and crashed back down in a ball of fire. He walked away with minor injuries. Here's how 40 years of tragedy had finally created a miracle. You're strapped into the safest race car ever built. Every component has been designed, tested, and refined through decades of tragedy and triumph. You represent the culmination of everything drag racing has learned about keeping drivers alive at 300 miles per hour, and you're about to prove that progress is possible, even in the face of physics. Antron Brown represented the new generation of drag racing drivers who benefited from every safety innovation developed through 40 years of tragedy. His top-fuel dragster incorporated lessons learned from every fatal crash in the sport's history, from Don Garlitz's transmission explosion to Scott Kalida's parachute failure. But on this day in Las Vegas, all of that accumulated knowledge would face its ultimate test. Brown's Matco Tools dragster had been running perfectly all weekend. The car was fast, consistent, and perfectly suited to his smooth driving style. As he staged for his elimination round, everything looked routine, just another race in what was shaping up to be a championship season. The launch was flawless. Brown's dragster hooked up instantly, accelerating with the kind of authority that had made him one of the sport's rising stars. But at 1,000 feet, traveling at 315 miles per hour, the engine exploded with unprecedented violence. This wasn't just a typical nitro engine failure, it was a complete destruction that turned the rear half of the dragster into a fragmentation bomb. The supercharger case disintegrated, the engine block cracked, and the transmission housing shattered, sending hundreds of pieces of metal flying at supersonic speeds. But unlike the crashes that had killed previous drivers, Brown's car was equipped with advanced containment systems designed to prevent exactly this type of failure from becoming fatal. Kevlar blankets absorbed the shrapnel, titanium barriers deflected the debris, and carbon fiber shields protected the cockpit from penetration. The explosion also damaged the car's aerodynamics, launching it skyward at 315 miles per hour. For a terrifying moment, Brown was flying through the air in a disintegrating race car, watching the Las Vegas Strip spin below him through his helmet visor. When the car came down, it hit the track surface with tremendous force, then tumbled end over end for over 400 feet before finally coming to rest upside down in a cloud of smoke and debris. When rescue crews reached the wreckage, they expected to find another tragedy. Instead, they witnessed the culmination of 40 years of safety evolution. Antron Brown climbed out of the cockpit under his own power, suffering only minor cuts and bruises. The survival cell that protected him had absorbed tremendous impact energy. The racing seat had cradled his body during the violent deceleration, and the advanced restraint system had kept him positioned correctly within the safety zone. Most importantly, the helmet and head and neck restraint system had prevented the type of injuries that had killed so many drivers in the past. When Brown's head snapped forward during the impact, the technology absorbed the energy and redirected it safely. Brown's survival wasn't just lucky, it was meaningful. It proved that every driver who had died in pursuit of speed had not died in vain. Every safety system that saved Antron Brown's life had been developed in response to someone else's tragedy. His miraculous survival was the ultimate validation of progress, paid for in blood, proof that human ingenuity could eventually triumph over the physics of destruction. The modern miracle had occurred not through divine intervention, but through engineering excellence built on the foundation of remembered sacrifice. The final reckoning. What 15 deaths taught us? 15 crashes, 15 lives, 15 lessons written in blood and delivered at the speed of sound. What did we learn from this catalog of tragedy and triumph? You've just witnessed 15 different ways to die at 300 miles per hour. You've seen fire, explosion, mechanical failure, and human error combine in ways that defied preparation and overwhelmed skill. You might be wondering why anyone would choose to accept such risks. The answer lies not in the crashes themselves, but in what happened afterward. Every death on this list sparked innovations that saved hundreds of lives. Every tragedy became the foundation for technology that protected future generations. Every loss was transformed into progress through the determination of people who refused to accept that these deaths were meaningless. Don Garlett's transmission explosion led to the rear-engine dragster design that eliminated the deadliest mechanical failure in the sport. Blaine Johnson's engine failure sparked containment systems that prevent exploding engines from becoming projectiles. Scott Kalitta's parachute failure forced the sport to shorten race distances and improve safety barriers. Eric Medlin's invisible injuries led to helmet technology that protects drivers from the forces they can't see. Darrell Russell's shrapnel storm created ballistic protection systems that turned survival cells into armored cocoons. John Force's crash data became the foundation for modern funny car safety design. The pattern is clear. Every death led to life-saving innovations. Every tragedy became a technological breakthrough. Every loss was transformed into gain through the determination of survivors who honored the dead by protecting the living. Today's drag racing is the safest it has ever been, not despite these crashes, but because of them. Modern drivers are protected by technology that didn't exist when these men died. Titanium survival cells, advanced fire suppression systems, ballistic protection, impact-absorbing barriers, and medical response teams trained in high-speed trauma care all exist because 15 people paid the ultimate price for progress. The current generation of drivers competes in cars that are faster, more powerful, and more dangerous than anything these men ever imagined. Yet, they're statistically safer because of the lessons learned from these tragedies. But does that make their deaths worthwhile? Ask any drag racer, and they'll tell you the same thing. Every person on this list died doing what they chose to do, accepting risks they understood completely, in pursuit of something greater than themselves. They didn't race despite the danger, they raced because of it. The danger was never the enemy. The enemy was the unknown, the mechanical failures that couldn't be predicted, the physics that couldn't be overcome, the split-second decisions that couldn't be undone. These 15 crashes changed drag racing forever. But the story isn't over. Every weekend, new drivers strap themselves into machines that are faster, more powerful, and more sophisticated than anything these pioneers could have imagined. They do so knowing that despite all the safety improvements, despite all the technological advances, despite all the lessons learned in blood, the fundamental equation hasn't changed. At 330 miles per hour, 4 seconds can contain a lifetime of glory or a lifetime of regret. The only difference is that now, thanks to the sacrifices of these 15 men, glory is more likely than regret. They paid the price so others could chase the prize. That's not just their legacy, that's their victory. In drag racing, we don't race to honor the dead. We race because they showed us how.